Welcome to the Action Network podcast. We are presented by the FanDuel Sportsbook. I'm your host today, Brendan Glasheen, joined by Sean Zerillo and Billy Ward. It's a UFC betting preview. Welcome, everybody. UFC Vegas 77 this weekend from the Apex Center in Las Vegas. We have 5 fights on the main card, 8 prelims. We'll dive into underdogs, props, our breakdown of the fight of the night, and then some best bets before we wrap. So as we normally do, we'll start with the main event. All the fights this week are available on ESPN. We've got Holly Holm, the favorite, at -182 over at FanDuel. Mayra Bueno Silva, +142. Bueno Silva going for a 4th consecutive win. It's a top 10 bantamweight fight. Sean Zerillo, as we normally begin, your assessment of the main event and how you pick it apart to bet it.
Yeah, I think on the things that we normally talk about, right? The age differential, especially at a lighter weight class, you kind of do have to lean to the underdog here in Mayra Bueno Silva. In terms of the matchup, the stylistic nature, I think Holly Holm, this is a favorable matchup for her, but she's 41 years old, 10 years older than her opponent. And as we regularly talk about, when there's that big of an age gap between UFC opponents, especially when the opponent is 40 years old, the younger fighter wins about 10% more often than the betting market tells you that they are. So generally speaking, going to point towards the younger fighter here based on the age gap. Holly looked pretty solid in her last fight, but the cliff is going to come at some point. When it comes, it's going to be very dramatic. And as we always talk about too, in MMA, which is a one-on-one sport, when that athleticism drops off, it is very apparent. You saw with Keith Lee or Kevin Lee a couple of weeks ago, just looked like he couldn't move because he looked so stiff after multiple knee surgeries. Nico Price going against Robbie Lawler. Just there's this stiffness after you get a lot of injuries and a long career and beat up. You know, the athleticism just suddenly drops off of a cliff. So not necessarily saying that I think that's going to happen to Holly Holm here, but it is very likely to happen at some point in her next few fights. In terms of how I see the stylistic fight playing out, Bueno Silva very happy to get taken down and fight off of her back because that's where she's the most dangerous. Really good submission game off of her back. But Holm is the better minute winner, both on the feet. She's the better striker and on the ground. I think she's going to have more time where she's in top position after landing takedowns. One thing with Bueno Silva, people see the low takedown defense. I actually think she's willing to accept those takedowns more than she's not preventing the takedowns, because rather than wrestle offensively and use that energy to get to the fight to the mat, she's fine letting her opponents take her down and play a game where she's a bit more comfortable. So in terms of a bet for this matchup, if I'm playing anything, it's going to be Bueno Silva by submission at about +390. I made that line closer to about +350, +300. I think that's the one method or the one bet that probably has value in this fight. But if I'm picking it straight up, I think Holm is a deserving favorite. Wouldn't really touch the money line unless he got closer to about +175 on Bueno Silva. But even there, I'd probably prefer her submission prop. So dog or pass for me based on the age. And if I'm going with the dog, I'm playing the submission prop.
Of course, the only older fighter exception you would make was Robbie Lawler.
Yep. Yeah, you need to be fighting another older fighter or another fighter who's potentially retiring. And even though there was an age differential between Nico Price and Robbie Lawler, we talked about the fact that Price had been through a number of wars himself and knocked out basically in the third punch of the fight. So nice to cash a ticket on a retiring fighter. And we'll go away from playing those angles for quite a bit longer until we get another spot like that.
So speaking of the money line on the dog, Billy, you're actually willing to go there, and you shop around, you do get a better number on Bueno Silva. Why are you willing to go in that direction?
I am, and it wasn't my initial read on the fight. I was looking at, methods the way Sean pointed out. I have another bet on it that we'll touch on in a second. But the one thing about Sean's analysis I disagree with a little bit is I actually like MBS's style against Holly Holm. And the reason is because she's really solid in the clinch. Holly Holm's game plan lately has just been kind of hold you up against the fence and slowly suck time off the clock while winning minutes that way. Mayra is very sharp with elbows and knees in the clinch. She has like an old school shooter box fighter feel. So, the Vanderlei and Anderson Silva way back in the day, where she's really tough in the clinch and really good submissions, not great at winning positions. And the way that we're scoring fights these days, as we've talked about, winning the position is far less important than it used to be. So even in a fight like this, if we were using quote unquote the old judging criteria, because the criteria hasn't really changed, but how it's implemented has, I think that would favor Holm a lot more than the current judging system does. And I could certainly see a scenario where Holm has Bueno Silva against the fence for a good chunk of the round, but Myra lands an elbow or a knee in there, cuts her open, hurts her just a little bit, and that's enough to swing the judges. So that's the one thing I like about that, as well as agreeing with Sean that there's definitely an athleticism difference here. Myra's pretty fast by all things considered for the division. And I think Holm has already started to slow down. We've seen her grapple a lot more in her last couple of fights. She was a world champion boxer and kickboxer, and she's taking down fighters like Yana Santos. And I think she knows that she doesn't have the speed that she used to, which is why she's doing things like that. So, part of it is predicting that falling off a cliff happens sooner rather than later. And I don't hate the style for MBS. But the other bet I'm making on it, a little bit more fun, is this fight to go to a split or a majority decision. Just because of what I've talked about. Is Holly Holm going to win minutes? Absolutely. But will Myra Bueno win some moments that turn those around? It's always hard to judge a Holly Holm fight because she doesn't do a ton, but she's usually in the theoretically better position. So we never know what we're going to get on the judges' scorecards. Obviously, don't put a whole unit on this plus 450 prop, but I think there's a greater than usual chance that judges can't really decide a couple of these rounds here because Holm's on top and Bueno's looking for submissions, or Holm has her against the fence while Bueno's throwing elbows. So, and that's also a bit of a hedge against the money line play I'm making.
You care to respond, Zerillo?
No, I think that's the Billy and I had talked about it, the other day when we met each other at the Action Network Content Summit in person for the first time. But yeah, I mean, that's the initial read on this fight for both of us was fight ends by split majority decision, just lower fight class or lower weight class. Main event optics are going to be close. I think it's likely that this one's going to be difficult to score. That's why for my purposes, I'm kind of taking the finishing aspect out of it. I mentioned Bueno Silva by submission. If you can get finish only markets, I think I might prefer her there as well. She's pretty tough. And I think she has more of the finishing upside in this fight. We've seen Holm submitted in the past when people are able to get to dominant positions on her on the mat. So, if that athleticism gap too is significant, like it might be if Holm drops off of a cliff, it's probably likely that she gets finished as well over a 25-minute fight. So yeah, finish only market, Bueno Silva as well. But yeah, I don't mind Billy's play on the fight ends by split decision because it is the type of fight that lines up with that type of read.
For our personal purposes, it was very nice meeting both of you in person. We had yet to meet each other in person for those listening. We met for the first time Monday and Tuesday this week. So
big happy family now.
Yeah. And closer than ever. And now I feel like we're just going to take it and ride it. So very good. As if we hadn't been doing that already, but just further brings us along here on the audio side. Favorite underdog, Zerillo, for UFC 77?
Yeah, don't want to steal Billy's thunder, but very much with him on the pick he's going to give out. I'm also with him on his best bet on this card. We're actually aligned on a lot of fights, but I'm going to go a little bit crazier and go with Basil Hafez against Jack Della Maddalena. Jack Della was supposed to fight last week. His opponent dropped out, gave him a short notice replacement. That short notice replacement had some sort of brain injury pop up on a scan. I'm glad they caught that, but they rebooked him for this week. He stayed in Vegas. Overall, I'm kind of fading Jack Della on what appears to be a current title run for him. I think he's a great boxer. I really enjoy watching his fights, but we've still yet to see somebody get him to moments where they're able to grapple him in the UFC. All of his UFC fights, except for his Contender Series bout, have ended inside essentially of 3.5 minutes. And we really haven't seen anybody take him to the ground. Ramazan Mamiv got him there briefly, but the fight popped back quickly to the feet. Hafez is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt and primarily a grappler. His striking has improved in his recent fight, scored a knockout in his last fight, more of an attritional knockout, but he can strike and he can hang on the feet. But I think he has the type of style that if he's able to get Jack Della down, can cause some serious problems. So Hafez plus 475 on the money line, like it down to about plus 420. Also going to take a look at his finish props inside the distance as well. Maybe even a round one prop too. He is taking this fight on short notice, as I said, so may not have the best cardio. And also if he doesn't have a lot of success wrestling, his cardio is probably likely to drop off as well. But I do think he is the type of style to cause Jack Della problems. And I'm going to keep betting against Jack Della with guys who are going to try to grapple him as he ascends up the welterweight ranking. So Hafez, big juicy money line number, I think is worth playing this week.
Billy, you're also in alignment on Lutz. That number is moving at plus 136 at FanDuel. That might be a number you want to get sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I had that actually in my notes, was make sure to remind people now is the time if you're playing this one. But I'm also in alignment with Sean on Hafez, which I'll get to a little bit later. But
Well,
I was very glad when I had my Lutz pick in here to see that I wasn't the only one thinking that way. It just seems like an offline to me. As we've talked about, Lutz has all the grappling upside. And when you have an underdog with grappling upside, I don't want to say that's an automatic bet, but it's pretty close. Because we've seen Melsick get taken down. He's fighting Melsick Bagdasaryan, who has a kickboxing background, high-level kickboxing, but it just hasn't translated to MMA the way I think it does for some guys. He's I believe 2-1 in the UFC, but both the people he beat are winless in the UFC and have immediately been cut. Not tough competition. And the one thing I saw on tape that I really liked is when Lutz is kicked, he has an excellent response by just coming right back with a straight shot. And when you're fighting a guy like Melsick, who relies so heavily on his kicks, that's going to be really important. I don't think that's ideal. We'd rather not get kicked in the first place than have a good response to getting kicked. But that kind of thing will keep Melsick on the back foot, make him vulnerable for takedowns, and give Lutz the chance. This actually was like plus 160 something last night when I was looking at it, and it's already sank and is currently sinking. So when Zerillo is on one side, our editor Dan Stupp is planning on making this his best bet. It's my read, and the market is heavily hammering it. This one, even if you don't know anything about the fighters involved, a lot of signs that that's probably the A side of this fight, at least at the current line. I'd probably play it even all the way down to plus 120 or so, but get the better number while you can.
yeah, this line's been coming down all week. It was plus 175. Two other points I want to mention. Lutz also has a 2-inch reach advantage on the feet, and I think he could compete in the kickboxing. But as Billy mentioned, not only does he have the grappling upside, I also think he has better cardio. Melsick typically fades after about 6 or 7 minutes. So I think Lutz is a good live bet after round one as well. But yeah, grappling upside, cardio upside at plus money, that's a very easy bet to make.
Okay, moving on to the fight of the night. We have Nazim Sadykhov. He is at minus 152 as we record on a Friday morning. The favorite over Terrence McKinney. He's at plus 124. So that number has risen ever so slightly. Zerillo, same question as the main event. How do we assess this fight, and how would you like to bet it?
Yeah, Sadykhov is my best bet on the card. We'll talk about some best bets later. There's actually a bunch of other money lines I like on this card, more so than usual, but Sadykhov would be my best bet amongst them. The thing is, you're going to have to sweat this one for a couple minutes because Terrence McKinney generally is extremely dangerous for about 3 to 5 minutes. The problem with McKinney is it's becoming a bit of a psychological game for him because he started out his UFC career very hot, getting quick knockouts, had a bunch of quick knockouts regionally. But then the moment he got extended and eventually finished in his next fight, he didn't really press on the gas early. And it's sort of he either does his best optimal game plan and it wins or loses, or he doesn't do his best game plan and he's going to fade anyway. So I would expect him to try to come out hot here again because taking his foot off the gas didn't really work for him last time. And he still eventually tired anyway and was finished. But Sadykhov, a tough guy, trains on Long Island. Long Islanders just, tougher than the average population in general. Trains with, Ray Longo at the Longo and Weidman gym. So very good training partners, probably training with the champ, Aljamain Sterling. Matt Frivola out there. He's got a lot of really good training partners to work with. McKinney moves around, but we haven't really seen major improvements from him. He's a strong wrestler. He might be able to get a takedown here early. But as I said, that cardio does not last. He's very explosive. He uses all of his power into all of his techniques, and it doesn't really last beyond a few minutes. So Sadykhov, another guy, I think it's a phenomenal live bet after round one, but it may not even get there. He might finish McKinney near the end of round one based on how McKinney gasses in the past, or he may be losing the first few minutes of round one and then flip things around by the end of a round and basically be, a bigger favorite going into round two than he was going into round one, even though he lost the first few minutes of the round. So yeah, the cardio discrepancy, the durability discrepancy, the hardware, all of it favors Sadykhov, in addition to the fact that I just think he's the better and more technical fighter. So Nazim Sadykhov was losing his last fight, the first 2 rounds prior to getting a cut stoppage. And I actually think that is giving value on us in this fight. I think a lot of people looking at the minute losing in his last fight, where this is a fight that is very likely to end by finish.
Billy, McKinney has dropped 2 of his last 3 fights, and both losses were by KO or TKO. Are you in alignment here with Zerillo?
Yeah, 100%. The one thing I wanted to add on a more, data-driven standpoint. McKinney in his career, he is 1-3 in fights that make it past 3 minutes. Not out of the first round, past 3 minutes. So the obvious angle here is Sadykhov live. You know, we talked on our experts guide recently that I don't like to live bet during a round because of the TV lag. This might be the one exception. You know, we hit that 2-minute mark, no matter what's going on. Just, you know, fire up your FanDuel Sportsbook app and be ready, because it's really 3 minutes of cardio at best for McKinney the vast majority of the time. If I had to bet this one pre-fight, my favorite way to play it is, you know, books where you can do a same game parlay and just parlay Sadykhov with over 2.5 minutes, 3.5 minutes, 4.5 minutes, somewhere in there, because that's when it's likely going to happen. You know, it's obviously riskier that McKinney just starches him right away, but you can get a much better line. And, you know, maybe Sadykhov wins early, but if he has any sense in terms of the game plan, it's kind of just survive this opening salvo, take over late. And that is the problem, as Sean pointed out. It's really hard to know that after round one, we're going to get a better price, because McKinney doesn't even make it through one round of cardio. It's less than that. So I wanted to give something pre-fight for people who may or may not be watching this less intriguing UFC card, but the best way to play it is certainly live.
And his round 2 prop is plus 500, you know, for a minus 150 money line. That is a very low round 2 prop. The fight is minus 700 to end inside the distance, but typically you see those round 2, round 3 props around 10-1 and 15-1 respectively. And for Sadykhov here, he's plus 500 and about, you know, 1,000 in round 3. So the books know what's up. It's likely a second or third round finish.
So we're really just hoping that whoever's doing the live betting as this bet is happening isn't super confident with how that usually goes. Because if they're adjusting for the fact that they expect McKinney to gas out, then there's probably no play there. But my guess is they're not as sophisticated on the live markets as they are pre-fight.
Okay, good stuff. So there could be a live betting opportunity, but proceed with caution. Prop market, Zerillo, where are we looking this week?
Yeah, going to go with a bit of a different approach. There's a couple of ways you could play it. So I'm going with Victoria Dudakova in her technical UFC debut. She did win on Contender Series, and she's going against Estela Nunes, who is 0-3 in the UFC, getting a rare 4th opportunity after starting 0-3 in the UFC. But she's actually been finished twice in the second half of her fights, and typically gasses, as we've talked about other fighters on this card, after about the 7-minute mark. So Nunes, very good, wins the first round fairly frequently. But after that first round, she drops off substantially. The skill level, the cardio just does not align. I think she's talented, but if she could last for more than 7 minutes, she could actually win fights. Dudakova has the grappling upside here. I expect her to land takedowns and wear on her opponent. I don't mind her round 2 and round 3 props, which, as I said, there's a couple of ways to play this. But if you can find a same game parlay, very easy approach with Dudakova and the over 1.5 rounds at plus money. That's as she should come into her ideal win condition and the majority of where she's going to dominate this fight. So Dudakova in the over 1.5 rounds at plus money, fine bet to make. But also if you want to play her round 2 prop at about 5-1, her round 3 prop at 12-1 respectively. I don't really love that round 2 prop as much. And other books too, FanDuel sometimes offers the round 3 or decision prop as well. I think all of those good ways to play Dudakova, depending on how you want to do it. But yeah, she should win minutes, especially in the second half of this fight, and just look for ways to bet against Nunes after round 1, including a live bet.
So those are 2 separate same game parlays, or is that right?
Yeah. So just to recap, there's really 3 different ways you could play it. If you can play a same game parlay, Dudakova in the over 1.5 rounds at plus money.
Yep.
You could target her round 2 and round 3 props at bigger plus money, or you could also target her round 3 or decision prop as well. I think that round 3 or decision prop or the same game parlay would be my preferred options. The round 2 sprinkle at plus 500, as I just talked about with the McKinney fight, getting a round 2 at plus 500 on a fighter, not super appealing, especially on a fight like this that is actually a pick 'em to go to a decision, whereas that McKinney fight was minus 700 to end inside the distance. So round 3 or decision, I would say, for Dudakova or that same game parlay.
Got it. Okay. Very good. Billy, where are we looking? You actually teased this when we discussed underdogs.
Yeah, the Jack Della Maddalena Basil Hafez fight. I'm still not 100% exactly how I want to bet it, but I'm pretty confident in the story of this fight. And this feels like one where Basil Hafez wins at the very least a moral victory against Jack Della Maddalena. And as we know, there's not really moral victories in the UFC, but sometimes we get these short notice fighters who they look okay, they hang in there against a tough opponent, they make it to the judges, and that's pretty much their ceiling, and we're excited about that. Because I do think, for the reasons Sean pointed out, he's got some grappling upside. I think JDM is probably good enough on the ground to not get submitted, but can he lose a round to a jiu-jitsu black belt? Absolutely. Hafez went to a draw with Jeremiah Wells, who's one of the best grapplers in the division. He actually had a grappling match against Gordon Ryan, so my fellow grappling nerds know who Gordon Ryan is. That went to a decision. He didn't get tapped out by Ryan, which, again, kind of another moral victory. So a couple of the angles I'm looking at, just this fight and to go over 1.5 rounds is plus 170. And if we think it's going to be close, you could, assume that that's a pretty safe bet, especially that kind of plus money. The other one that I like, and now we're seeing it pop up more and more, is Hafez's spread at plus 3.5 is plus 270 out there in the market. That's not a bet we usually hear about in UFC, but basically, if he doesn't get finished and he wins 1 round, he covers that plus 3.5 because it's the sum total of all the judges' scorecards. So if it's 29-28 against him, maybe he wins the first round, especially with taking it on short notice and not having the gas tank, and then survives to the end. That's a pretty juicy price for that. He just basically needs to not get finished. So tons of ways you can play this. You could get real aggressive and do, Hafez and over if you really want to play it hard. But I'm just thinking that it's going to be closer than it looks. I think JDM probably wins this more often than not, but it's one of those where we all walk away really impressed by Hafez. Everyone's excited to see him fight with a full training camp, but he doesn't necessarily have his hand raised.
And then not only that, he'll win round 1, get finished in round 2, and we'll say, oh, he covered his price tag. And then he'll be a minus 300 favorite in his next fight, and we'll bet against him after the overcorrection since he looks so good against Jack Della. So that is generally how it goes with these debutantes, especially on short notice. They overperform, and they become a favorite in their next fight, and we have to bet against them.
We conclude our UFC Vegas 77 betting preview with a best bet or a final bet. Zerillo, what category do we have this week?
Well, since Sadykhov is my best bet on this card, but honestly, there's a number of money lines that I like, all of which I like more than that Robbie Lawler play from last week. So not really sure how to feel about that. Billy's going to give out a play as a best bet. I really like that one too. But in terms of my favorite remaining bet, that is a money line bet that is not Sadykhov, Jin Young Park. He is 6-2 in the UFC. It is very difficult to go 6-2 in the UFC. Do not overlook that fact. Facing Albert Duraev, who I think people would expect to have the grappling upside in this fight, but there is a cardio discrepancy here. Park is the bigger man as well. I want to pull up the exact height and reach discrepancy, but Park, better striker. Duraev basically needs to wrestle him, but Duraev is the type of fighter who, even when he's able to successfully wrestle his opponents, he's not really putting on a lot of damage or creating a lot of separation for the judges in terms of what he's doing with those takedowns. He's sort of trying to mat return them, rinse and repeat those takedowns, drag them down, and then maintain position. But he doesn't really land a ton of ground and pound with it because he's trying to consolidate those positions. So Park on the feet, I think he wins the striking exchanges. I think he wins the late minutes in this fight down the stretch, particularly as Duraev tries to wrestle him. Maybe doesn't have success, or Park is able to get back up. And beyond that, I really just favor Park's experience and the level of competition that he's faced. And I think, generally speaking, as a UFC fighter, he is largely underrated. As I said, going 6-2 in the UFC is not easy. Even his decision loss, to Rodriguez was fairly competitive. Gregory Rodriguez, that was a back and forth fight where he actually had Rodriguez on skates and then got knocked out himself. And it was surprising to see Park get knocked out. His nickname's the Iron Turtle. He's generally considered durable and is able to take a lot of damage, and not the biggest finisher himself, but he has finished his past 2 fights via rear naked choke and sort of using his cardio to grind down opponents. So I think Park is making improvements. But as I said, grappling upside, durability upside, cardio upside, I think he's a justifiable favorite at minus 150. Another guy I think you can live bet after round 1, but I think a fine pre-fight bet at minus 150. So there's a few other favorites on this card. Munoz, Perez, Costa, all at around minus 180 to minus 220. I have bets on them. You can mix those around in parlays, but Park and Sadykhov both around minus 150, my 2 favorite bets on this card.
All right. And Park is up to -162.
Yeah, that's fine. You can take it to about -175. There's some room there.
Okay. Very good. And Billy, you are also on Prado.
Yeah, I am. And there's two sides to this. So the first, he's fighting Ottman Azaitar. The first is the Prado side. This is the second UFC fight for Prado. He lost what one might dub a moral victory. He lost a fight that one might dub a moral victory to Jamie Mullarkey back at UFC 284. Prado, 20 years old, fighting out of Argentina, takes it on short notice, flies all the way to Australia, and puts on a more or less competitive fight with Jamie Mullarkey, which, given the circumstances and everything surrounding that, I was impressed by. You know, he had his moments. He got taken down a little bit, but looked really good off his back, hunting for submissions, able to get his way back to his feet. Almost tapped him at the end of the fight, which would have been a huge upset at the time. And we talk about, you know, trying to project fighter progression. This might be the biggest difference between how a fighter looked in his debut and their next fight, because he was 20 years old, so still nowhere near his athletic prime, and just extremely difficult circumstances to make your UFC debut. You know, it's not like he did it at a fight night event with 20 people in the crowd. This was a huge hostile environment halfway across the world, one of the biggest cards in a long time. So I think there's just a lot of projectable room for improvement on Prado right now. The other side of it is Ottman Azaitar. His last win was nearly 3 years ago. Sometimes that's just kind of a scheduling quirk, or, you know, you fought some tough guys in that stretch. But with him, it's a little bit different. There's a bloody elbow story a couple months ago. He and his brother are apparently like best friends with the Moroccan king and have been flying all over the world and partying with him and taking him out and showing him a good time and all this stuff, which doesn't seem like the best lifestyle for a you have yet to make it to the top style fighter. You know, we see it with guys, Conor McGregor among them, who once they get to that level of wealth and opulence, they kind of fall off. Now we've got a pair of brothers, never really got there, kind of just living a weird lifestyle out there. I don't want to put too much in that, but go read the bloody elbow story, anyone, if you haven't yet. It is a wild tale of the stuff these guys get up to. And that just doesn't seem like someone who's entirely focused on fighting. So, you know, looking to fade him, obviously. Prado, another one of those earlier in the week, a little bit of a better line. I'm still more than happy with the -115.
He's also 12 years younger.
Yep. And that's another one we like to talk about, is that age gap.
Yeah, especially, you know, lightweight, not as concerned, like 33 years old at lightweight for Azaitar, but Prado making it to the UFC at 21, he's a bit of a physical specimen. I think this kid has serious upside, you know, going forward. You know, he may not be anywhere close to his peak right now, but in a few years, this kid's going to be really good. So happy to bet on him as he's on his ascent, and I think he's a much better athlete.
And it might be one of those cases where we look back a couple years from now and say, wow, I can't believe we got him at -115. He's been -300 his next 6 fights if he looks good here. So
that's a good point.
After our shenanigans from early in the week, there are no bloody elbows to report from the Action Network Content Summit, which is
that's the name of the website. I'm sorry, is bloodyelbow.com as an MMA journalist.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Sorry.
No, don't apologize. I should have clarified or double checked before I went there. So, okay, very good. That's going to do it for our UFC Vegas 77 betting preview on the Action Network podcast. We are presented by FanDuel. I'd like to add, if you are a baseball fan, you can find Sean Zerillo's opening pitch right up. He's got the slate broken down for Friday, and baseball's back. And then Billy Ward's got his Nerfy picks available as well over at Action Network. So if you're a baseball fan, these guys are on it as well. For Billy Ward, Sean Zerillo, Brendan Glasheen, thanks for listening, everybody. We will join you again next week. See you later.